Welcome to the last Poetry in the Parlor of the season, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. And yay, it's been a fun season. We go to the porch next month, so we'll be on Kenyon Street on a porch next month. But this is really fun. Today is the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's birthday. So, yeah, it's very cool.
Happy birthday.
It's National Poetry Month, so I know Rennie has been very busy giving like a reading or two a day. So it's been a very busy month for him, but we're very fortunate. We have two students from the University of Hartford here to read with us today. Very cool, very cool. In addition to Ben Grossberg and Leslie McGrath, so we are very excited to have them as well. So without further ado, we're just going to get started, and let me introduce our first student. Before Rennie's going to have to say a few words. Yes, Rennie, please.
Yes, I'm not going to do anything at all except that say that we have so many good things going on. It's the second day of Passover. It's the day after Earth Day. It's St. George's Day. It's Shakespeare's 400th birthday. It's the day after Gray Jacobic's wonderful inauguration of her new book, which won the William and it is also one of the several days of poetry in the pocket. You all know about that, right? You're supposed to walk around with a poem in your pocket, and if somebody asks you to read it, you're supposed to pull it out. And this goes on for another week or so, I think. I don't know who created this, who fomented this thing, but probably the Academy of American Poets or something. So does anybody here happen to have a poem in his or her pocket? Is there such one? One? Only one. All right. Isn't that
Cell
wonderful?
phone count?
Yeah, that's always.
Would you like to come up to the podium and read that here?
Okay. Please stick your arm.
Tell me please if I will need the mic. I've been inaugurated poetry in the pocket at Seabury Retirement Community where I live, and we've been having a lot of fun. They're getting so relaxed about it that we're having a lot of dirty limericks lately. But the idea is to enjoy it. So I'm not screening anything out. Biblical verses on the other side. This one is called Dance, and I like to think this is my poetic interpretation of poetry. Stepping out upon the floor, shaping your steps, tentative at first, finding a way to glide with grace. You guide your partner, taking her hand, posture erect, flowing together. All angles come unhinged, melt into one continuous, sinuous shape, gliding, leaping, skimming the floor. What this dance is to our ungainly stances, poetry is to the inarticulate cries we utter in the isolation of our lives. No, I'm going to go that way. Let's see if I can get back.
Claims that you don't have to have it in your pocket. You can have it on your iPhone.
All right. That's quite a poem to have in your pocket, Kathy. That was really beautiful. That was a very beautiful poem. We have also a poem on the iPhone.
As he says it.
Yes, come on up and read, please. This is
Okay.
fun.
This is a fragment from Neruda's 20 Love Poems, and this is part of poem number 5. And I want you to hear how beautiful it is in Spanish. Para que tú me oigas, mis palabras se adelgazan a veces, como las huellas de las gaviotas en la playa. Collar, cascabel ebrio para tus manos suaves como las uvas. Y las miro lejanas, mis palabras, más que mías son tuyas. Van trepando en mi viejo dolor como las hiedras. Ellas trepan así por las paredes húmedas. Eres tú la culpable de este juego sangriento. Ellas están huyendo de mi guarida oscura. Todo lo llenas tú, todo lo llenas. Negras.
That was gorgeous. Does anybody else have a poem they'd like to read in another language especially? I really like that. I really like it. That was really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll take us right up to Amherst.
Oh,
Miss
sure.
Dickinson. I've
Come
got
on
it in
over.
my head, okay? It's always in my head. Emily Dickinson wrote this and I've adopted it because it's come true, but who knows why. If no one ever marries me, I don't know why they should. Since nurse says I'm not pretty and I'm seldom very good. I'll buy a house, a dog, and a goat and live aside the hill. And that's where I will live forever, very, very still.
Well, that was fun. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Now, without further ado, our students from the University of Hartford. First, we have Valerie Zapata, who is a senior at the University of Hartford, where she is double majoring in sociology and English with a concentration in creative writing. She will be graduating in May and aspires to work in the social services field and on the side create her own book of poetry. Valerie, please come on up.
Okay, so the first poem that I have for you guys is called Waiting Room. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm a little nervous. Is this?
No, that's just picking it up.
It's gonna pick it up. Okay. 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 So the first poem that I have for you guys is called Waiting Room. Goes like this. He was headed my way, pushing his bright metallic blue walker. One of his legs drooped as he dragged it. He looked at me. I saw something in his eyes, a tiny particle, like dust, from underneath my living room couch. I could taste it, emerging blood in my mouth. He was an endangered species. We all are, the sick, the damaged, and me. He began to speak. I couldn't hear. I gazed at his lips, white and peeling. I was rigid as a syringe, saying hello and how are you, but I could feel myself moldering in my seat, afraid for my own discoloring skin, dissolving, day to day. I went home, wondering if I brought him sadness, if my empathy overwhelmed him, or if he smelled the stench of dying in me. Somehow I felt unanswered and unfinished, uncertain if I'll ever be ready to die.
Wow.
Very good. Yes. Shakespeare would like it.
Thank you. The second poem, it's titled in Spanish. It's called Para mi mamá. It's not completely in Spanish. I wish I could do that. I kind of have like I'm kind of scared to write in Spanish because
We'll work on that.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think of death often, and my inspiration of this poem was just kind of how I release things. So this was just me contemplating about my mom. So I would know if you stopped breathing, like smacking my knee on a chair or slipping on the pavement. I would know. The feeling of hitting my face against the concrete, balance snatched right from under me. That will be the day that silence will cloak its arms around my body, and my flesh will have no choice but to drown itself in bed, like the moon in the water. I'll be the napkin, and you'll be the spilled milk on the kitchen counter. I'll soak it all in. I'll bathe in you, like the rat in the toilet bowl. Eyes dry and blotchy, ears cavernous for you. And I'll never forgive you if you leave, because when you go, I swear I will too.
really beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing that. That was excellent. We have one more student. MD Taylor graduated from the University of Hartford with a bachelor's degree in creative writing. As a percussionist and a poet, his poetry focuses on the auditory texture of language. He often explores themes such as the spiritual, emotional restraints of the physical body, trauma, nature, renewal, and dark humor. He enjoys painting, mixing abstract designs, and cartooning. MD Taylor currently teaches English as a second language at the University of Hartford and plans on entering the Peace Corps to teach English abroad. Thank you very much for coming.
So, hi. My first poem is radically different from the two that Valerie just read, so a bit of a change of pace. It is a humorous anti-ode. I just graduated from college last year, and at the end of last year, I was really my brain was melting out of me, and I couldn't write serious things anymore, so I just started writing a bunch of odes and anti-odes that were just sort of strange, I suppose. So this first one is an anti-ode to flavor powder. When you get like chips, like Doritos or Cheetos or something like that, and that orange stuff everywhere, it's an anti-ode to that, because that stuff is terrible. Okay. Alright. An invasion of flavorful fleas, a flesh-eating disease transforming fingertips to luminous rust, the exploding dye pack that marks a thief, asbestos coating the esophagus. Hours after I've ingested you, my gestures still waft honey barbecue and jalapeno cheddar, and my breath, well, let's just say I sleep alone. What are you? I've never stumbled upon this color in a vegetable garden or spice rack. Were you hatched in the same military labs that first stirred up LSD? Do I dare glance at the ingredients? A peek. A column of whispered text on which leans a savvy jungle cat, sunglasses tipped down his snout. His eyes tell me to turn the bag back around slowly. Out of eyeshot of the beast, I nibble spicy grime from under my nails. Do my organs grow orange under my skin? Surely this isn't digestible or biodegradable. 5 years tops, the air will have a fluorescent tint. Flavor will ride the wind like pollen, peppering the earth until soil is either uninhabitable or plants mutate to thrive on MSG. Picture it. Brittle tendrils stretching from neon fields, blooms breaking open with a puff of flaming cheddar, the sun baking roadkill with barbecue seasoning, and obese children clawing at each other to get a taste. I keep suckling the dust from my sore fingers. The apple that condemned Eden was coated in habanero cheese. That's my first one. My next one is a little less silly, I suppose. This one's called Spring. I guess it's just about transformations and such. Spring. So transfixed by the static of a fly swarm, I hadn't noticed my body hair growing back, my crimson skin settling to cream, or the warmth of daylight on my back. In my ears, the hum of insects' wings transformed into the sighing waves of passing cars, a collage of pedestrian voices, and the ripple of leaves whipping in the wind. I'm not cement, not a clog in the sink, not an abandoned cathedral. Before I can comprehend the motion, my body carries me out to a patch of grass, teeming with clover and aphids, green crawling over green, clustered but not choking, clustered like seeds in the heart of fruit. My body cradles me as it weaves through trees. Sudden rain shocks body and I into unity, an all-encompassing cold I welcome with limbs splayed, spine and curved back. Each drop a letter, each puddle forming in the grass a paragraph, and I'm just beginning to learn the language. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so nice to hear such young voices with just different perspectives. I really appreciate that very much. It's very nice. Well, we will start with Leslie McGrath. Leslie is a poet and a teacher. She is the author of Opulent Hanger, Opulent Range, a poetry collection, and 2 chapbooks, Towards Anguish and By the Windpipe. McGrath's latest book is a satiric novella in verse, out from Pallades. Winner of the Pablo Neruda Prize for Poetry, Leslie has been awarded residencies at Hedgebrook and the Vermont Studio Center, as well as funding from the Connecticut Commission on the Arts and the Beatrice Fox Arbuck Foundation. Her poems and interviews have been published or are forthcoming in Agni Poetry Magazine, the Writer's Chronicle, and the Yale Review. Leslie lives in Essex with her husband and boat builder and teaches creative writing at Central Connecticut State University in New Britain. Thank you very much for coming, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Katie. This has turned into an amazing event. And you guys did incredibly. I'm so jealous of Ben for being able to have students as talented as you guys. Keep writing. I do want to mention that I never studied English, literature. I studied Spanish literature. And that's how I became a poet. And it makes my poetry a little bit different because I use the language. I love the chewiness of language, even though I now write in English. But I didn't write in English until I was 40. I just thought, well, you know, Spanish is the language of poetry for me. So I thought tonight what I would do is read. I've been writing long enough now that I have a lot of poems about Connecticut. I grew up in Connecticut. I've lived in a number of places here. I'm never going to leave it now. I raised my children here, and I teach here. So I thought I would take you through some of the places that I have lived and some of the events that I have kind of gone through. I think I'll read from the two poems from my first book, which is Opulent Hunger, Opulent Rage. This first poem is about, my husband Bill is here. He's a boat builder in the Mystic area, and he restores old yachts. And so what he does with his hands is similar to what a poet does with language. And we've been together for 19 years now. But when I first met him, I was amazed by the language of boats. They're just beautiful, archaic old words. And so I would try to include them as much as possible. I'm trying to think, there's nothing in here that you need to know in terms of boat language, but what I do is mention a number of names for boats because they're always fascinating. This is called Fold. From our bass boat's slip on the Mystic, it's a two-bridge wait, bascule and swing bridge, before the river yawns into open water. But the fogs rolled in, the nasal lowing of horns warning us away. We do not go. We'll see no terns picking at striper, and if Agate's captain unwraps his sandwich, alone in the mooring field, restless and resolute, rocking to port and starboard, we'll not see him fold into clouds like paper into vaporous cranes. And continuing with that theme of boats, I'm going to read a poem that always makes Bill cry, which is why I haven't come tonight, because I love to kind of wind him up. This has a lot of words from boats. This has a lot of words that are parts of boats, and you really I don't even remember anymore. I asked him for about a year and a half, like, tell me some more, more. You don't really have to know, but just know that they're beautiful old English, archaic English. Boats are usually referred to as female, so you'll hear some references to female names like Clara and Caramia. Okay, this is called The Boat Builder's Wife. I know there are others. I see their faces, their traces on your clothing, the scratches, the bruises. Caramia's mahogany curls clung like birds to your sweater. 3 years with Neath, who ran off to the islands and never returned. Clara, that minx, left a sail-shaped scar on your scalp. But Circe took the tips of 2 fingers. I can't forgive her. Each night the scent of varnish, cedar, your pockets full of bungs and tarnished hardware, the same verdigris as your eyes. Each night, a transient, restoration. You swing in gimbaled sleep between soul, overhead, and ceiling, between forepeak and lazarette. And I, your tender, ferry you back to the morning shore, to the ones who await the chisel and the plane in your steady hands. Just want to make sure you're still in one piece. Oh, yes, we lived in Noank for a long, long time. Yeah. So I live now in Essex, and but I grew up in Fairfield, back when it was a really pretty little town. Now it's a little different. But my mother still lives there, and she has a little house on near Fairfield Beach, and that area was completely flooded in 2012 during the floods. Many of us who even lived close to a shore remember that. My mother was away in Europe, so I went down to check her house thinking, oh, no problem. And I wrote this 3-part poem about the way that water works. And it's called Surge, so the water surging this way, Wick going up, and then Raise, like to raise a house, R-A-Z-E afterwards. And it's really one of the first kind of environmentally attuned poems that I've written. Surge. Under the strobes mounted on their camoed jeeps, National Guardsmen seem to wobble as they check my ID before waving me into the dark. This is not my neighborhood. I live further inland and have returned to watch my mother's house after the water moved where it never had before, where we never thought it would. The lamp in her front hall, the still point of illumination as the tide backlaps through dark yards, dark houses, back over the berms the town built years ago, back into the Sound's hollowed basin. An isosceles of yellow police tape flutters from an oak to the minivan it crushed, as though what happened here was just a mischief night toilet papering. This is not my neighborhood. Tomorrow we'll find starfish in the climbing hydrangeas trained along the fence. The stench of something between death and heating oil will assert itself with the sun. Now the urge to ebb, to recoil in apology for the unavoidable, for the avoidable, for the unfixable, for the spitting wires dangling from trees, for the ruined photographs that would have given our lives a chance of being remembered by those who follow us, for the poisoned backyard gardens and the last puckered tomatoes on blackened vines in this neighborhood not mine. Second part. Wick. After water rushes horizontal, the wicking begins. Think of a flooded house as a thirsty drinker, sipping through millions of stiff straws, up beam and plasterboard, up curtain and wallpaper, like a candle's capillary action, channeling fuel to flame. Wicked water erupts into mold, black mold. Most of the houses there had to be torn down and rebuilt. And then the season of tearing them down came. This is Raise, R-A-Z-E. The scales are tipping, let them tip. Resist the urge to right the ship. Let the sea have its due and the earth have its due. History may appear asleep, but it is awake and moving. Let the hands of consequence set to work on the unbuilding of beam, board, pane, of stainless and automatic. Let it topple, flatten, rot. Let the movement be horizonward. Let the harrier, oh, time is coming, has come. Let the harrier nest in these reeds again, intent and listening for scurriers. Let this be salt march, hunting plain, birthplace and grave, not a neighborhood. So, it's not a very popular poem in my mother's neighborhood because everybody's rebuilt their houses. But anyway, I wrote a little poem a couple of years ago when I was going to drive to see Marilyn Nelson, who lives in or has been living in a very rural area. There's a little roadside stand that I love to stop by, and it's kooky because they sell these models of famous statuary. So they have the Statue of Liberty, and then they have all sorts of crazy stuff that people put in their lawns somewhere. I'm not sure they do it in Connecticut, but it made me kind of laugh. So here it is, at a roadside stand in Salem, Connecticut. I bought a half peck of McCown's and a pumpkin whoopie pie, big as a pumpkin. I pulled in for a closer look at the crowd in the parking lot. Horses frozen in mid-buck. Black griffins squatting in a sparrow line. And backed against the chain link, the Virgin Mary leaning hard on the Statue of Liberty. Like, what are they doing over there? So I teach at Central Connecticut State. I teach creative writing, nonfiction, and poetry. And for a number of years, I was driving from Stonington all the way up 95 and then all the way up Route 9 to New Britain. It was an hour and a half each way, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. So we moved about halfway. My husband works in Westerly, and I still work in New Britain, and we live in Essex. And I found in that little village a lot of things to write about. It happens that we bought a very old house, circa 1800, that's wonderful. But the coolest thing about it is that it backs up to the local baseball field. And I never really paid much attention to any sports at all, but I'm now paying attention. This is called the batting cage. If I drag the lawn chair to the edge of the patio, angling it along the mossy flagstones, pull its sun visor low as though I were in the car heading west into evening. If I look through the weeping cherries car wash sweep, through the chain link to the batting cage and beyond, I can see home plate and the blurred red blues diving and lifting there. What 100 years ago must have sounded like a spike driven into a railroad tie is the soprano tang of an aluminum bat making contact with a baseball. Bill talks wistfully of his boyhood turns at the plate in steamy Chesapeake heat, hoping his swing would make that leather-on-wood thock that he still hears as the sound of satisfaction. But what I listen for at Hubbard Field as dusk tips into night are the voices, pure as syrup, singing, "I've got it." Yeah, that's satisfying. I love bugs, luckily, because we live in old houses, and we've lived in old houses for quite a while now. And I was looking for something to write last winter, and I thought, well, the thing that I can write about is what I see, which is a whole hell of a lot of spiders. We had like a daddy longleg infestation, and I don't like to kill them because they're fascinating, but I got to the point where I kind of had to. But this is called daddy longlegs, and they really have attitude. So
You're aware of us.
yeah, yes, they are.
Where we want to get them.
Yeah. And you'll see this is a kind of a little discourse about how they kill their prey. Daddy longlegs. He's a thimble of pins, a skeletal bumbershoot, lounging like a pasha in loose hammocked silks, still, until some unwitting winged thing enwrapped missteps, trap, rap, a neat fatal bite, presto, Daddy's got a mummy. I'm going to kind of turn to another theme. Oh, I love your cat. That's not the theme, but it could be. I have been married to various men for the last 35 years. And I had a couple of kind of unfortunate early marriages until I found Bill. So I have a lot of experience failing in marriages and feeling the remorse that you inevitably feel no matter if you think it was a good idea or not. So this is a poem about marriage, the difficulties of marriage. It's called Marriage as Water. There's a woman to whom caress feels like fire, and fire caress. Father love made her a stranger in her own romance. Each refusal of her husband thrusts him farther from her. Draw near, dear heart, says she, but do not enter me. If marriage were mirror, refraction would double her fracture. But marriage is water, deep gathered and deepening, where love works its way free of grief. It took me about 20 years to try to write about my second horrible marriage, and to try to write in a way that wasn't the cheap, like he done me wrong kind of thing, and to finally feel some regret and some sadness. And I think I finally nailed it in this poem. This is a poem to my daughter with him, but it's about the marriage and what we still have together, what he and I have together. It's called The House Plant. It's one of the few good memories I have of my ex-husband repotting a big clivia plant, if you know plants. The house plant. Long ago, after you lost your first tooth, we watched your father repot his spider plant. I changed it. In the garden shed, propping the door open with a sack of potting mix. He bent down and gathered the leaves into a kind of loose ponytail, shaking until the pot let go the tangled roots. With one hand, I've held your hair like this and cupped your clammy forehead with the other to comfort you a little as you vomited. He must have done these things too, through stomach bugs and flu, experiments with booze, and more I won't go into in your furious adolescence. He sliced open the bag of soil, half filling 2 terracotta pots, and then eased the roots apart as I would a knot caught in your My Little Pony comb. He dunked them in a bucket of fertilized water. He always had a gift for strong beginnings. Then tucked the soil around them like good night. All the incantations at the altar come down to this: do for each other. And I suppose we did, through you. Can a child feel wholly cherished by one parent at a time? The clump I took in the divorce now crowds a window, its pot white-furred with lime and cracks resembling hieroglyphs in a language none of us can decipher. One bump with the vacuum, one infelicitous turn toward the winter sun, and the pot would fall to pieces. this last shared thing, aside from you, our daughter. It was a very long winter, not this past winter, but the winter before when there was so much snow. And I spent way too much time in my house, refusing to go outside and still trying to write. So I took to watching the birds. This is called A Winter Impulse, just a little 4-line poem. 2 cedar waxwings at the suet cake. One pecks, the other picks what falls. It takes a winter impulse, work together to get through. What if it had been that way with you? I have 2 daughters, and they're both grown. One's 29, the other's 33. One of them was adopted from Korea as an infant, and the other is a biological daughter. 2 different fathers, because I love to, make things very complicated, or did. And I don't see them together that often. One lives in LA, and one's married and working. But once in a while I get to see them both. And this is about an encounter I had with them. I was taking them to lunch. It used to be that it would work when I said I would pay for a meal. It doesn't really work anymore. But anyway, so it's really talking about their relationship. They're different races from different fathers, and they're very, very close, and I'm glad for that. It's called A Loyalty. And it centers around the Memorial Day Parade in Fairfield. And I'm sure there are Memorial Day parades in every town in Connecticut, but the one in Fairfield was always a big deal to me as a child, and then to my children when they were growing up. A loyalty. I get to the restaurant a few minutes early and don't even look for them. They're late for everything. I'm expecting my daughters, I tell the server, who tosses 3 sticky menus down. 2 women at a corner table wave their napkins like they're cheering from curbside at a parade as troop after troop of saggy-sashed scouts slouched past, and 3 dozen middle schoolers play You're a Grand Old Flag on rented clarinets for the ribboned veterans on the reviewing stand. What was it I was angling for when I dressed my girls in red, white, and blue for every Memorial Day parade of their childhood? It wasn't just to boost allegiance to the country of one's adoption and the other's birth. We're unabashedly American. Maybe I dressed them both in bunting to nudge a loyalty to each other, knowing that siblings can pick up where they left off, even after years of silence. Like a jump rope, lost behind the backyard shed, their sisterhood might stiffen and fray, but it'll work. And you wanted to give them something that would work when nothing you gave them would do. And you've given them every piddling thing you have, including a legacy of disappointing mothers that you've shawled around their shoulders. I look again. Those women are my daughters waving the small flags of their member states in the coalition I founded. I could go now, move through the long, ill-lit hall, forbid them to follow me, but I'm not ready to leave or to leave them to each other. They lean into a laugh, close as teeth. By the way, they're not very interested in the fact that their mother is a poet, and they don't want me to write about them, so you notice their names are missing. I'm going to turn a little bit again and read 2 poems about teaching and about being with college students. The first is an elegy for a student of mine who was a little hard to teach, a little tough. He didn't really want to be in my intro to poetry class, and he let me know it by, joking around in the back row for a long time until I said, "Hey, you sit right in front of me, James." So the day that their midterms were, I gave the midterms and I was passing them back. He had done very, very well, and I was so excited to give him an A. And I called his name out, nothing. Called his name out, nothing. And so here's the story. Elegy for James. You were not my friend, James. And as my student, you were a bit of a disruption, cracking up the others in the last row with snark delivered just low enough that I couldn't make it out from behind the lectern. I always worried you were making fun of me. You were often late to class, James, and on days when the lecture pressed some trap door into the reservoir of your interest, the answers you volunteered made me feel like I was a good enough teacher, like I'd gotten through to you. You who couldn't care less about allusions to Odysseus and the difference between sarcasm and satire. Sarcasm comes from the Greek, to tear flesh, remember? Yesterday, I waved your graded paper, called for you, to claim what you'd written so fervently about the relief that art can give in a world that seethes with hurt. There's a green-inked A-, circled like a bullseye next to your name. You'll never see it. The hit of heroin you took you. I'd even say it tore you from us and tore away from the 29 remaining in the seats and the one still leaning on the lectern. The illusion that death comes only after a long and well-lived life. And that's not sarcasm. I have to kind of tell you the story about this. This one has a very, very, very long title that basically tells you the whole backstory. But in college and really for a lot of my life, I think about the freedom of speech. How far can I go, basically, without really bothering other people? And certainly a lot of college students do the same thing. And there's a professor who shall remain nameless, luckily none of you go to my university, who kind of pushes the buttons of his students, an art professor, to go there. And he teaches a mural class. And so what they have to do is design a mural and then paint it, usually in the English department, because they're about to tear the English department down. They figure, screw it, we'll just write anything you want. So here's the title of the poem. And it was hard to write because I had to find a way to talk about this and still kind of point at myself. So this is a true story. To the student whose mural has an AK-47 aimed at the heads of faculty members entering the ladies' room, like this, right at the heads. How old were you when a teacher noticed your unusually keen eye and the kind of brashness an artist needs? 12? 15? You're the real thing, my high school English teacher proclaimed one spring afternoon in my junior year as he raked his chalky fingers through his thinning hair. I'd savaged the wasteland in a fury of adolescent Kant and AP vocabulary, which earned me an editorship on the school paper, where I ridiculed a born-again freshman touting the true way to God in a language so venomous for weeks our home phone rang off the hook with indignant threats from her loved ones. No explanations, no apologies. I was the real thing, the future of a world in need of my independent critical thinking. My teacher said so. as we expanded my cache of verbal ordnance, as we honed my skill in finding targets for self-righteousness, self-expression, as I soaked the windows of our imagined enemies and rang their doorbells, then ran like hell after lighting a bag of dog shit afire for them to discover while we high-fived in the getaway car of my teacher's praise of my courageous free speech. One of my friends says, yeah, no one gets off in a Leslie McGrath poem. I think I'm just going to finish two more. I was asked, when you've been around for a long time, sometimes you're asked to write a poem for an anthology. And there was a friend of mine had an anthology that she wanted to put together of still life poems. And a still life is usually like a bowl of fruit or like a couple of dead animals, beautifully arranged. But she said, be creative with it. So, okay. But it was the middle of last winter, and I wasn't leaving my house, and the only thing I could see was my neighbor's house, unfortunately for them. So, and our houses are pretty close. They're very, very close, as a matter of fact. And my bedroom window looks into their bedroom window. I say no more. This is called View of a Neighbor's Bedroom in Winter. Sorry. Our neighbor's house is old and painted red. So long ago painted red, that the clapboards peel like sunburn, though there's snow heaped on the roof. Their bedside lamp is an old milk glass whimsy, the canvas shade cocked like a sailor's cap as he squints at a dropping sun. I settle my imagination among the roses on the chenille bedspread, pulling from the stack on the illuminated table a book I've already read, in which the heroine lost her way by land, then made her way by water, laid her hard-won peace on a bed of fennel, on a fish-shaped platter, and when no one at the table touched her gift, she tipped it into the river. Your home is home as long as you think it so, and no longer. At the border of their yard and mine, under the ice-bound hedge, a rabbit hunkers like an anchor. And here's my last poem for the night, written about a house that Bill and I lived in for some time that was, unbeknownst to us, had a whole bunch of black snakes living in the basement, but at least we had no mice. So it was a beautiful old house.
It's true,
It was a really beautiful old house, and it had a center chimney, which, back before the days of electricity and everything else, people would light the fire in that chimney and then keep it going for all the cold weather. So it was like a spine that heated the whole house, and I was always fascinated by it. The opening in the kitchen was almost, you could walk into it. This is called Stone Eclogue, and it really reflects my obsession with those beautiful stones that we have in especially southeast Connecticut, and here as well. We've walked all the way to Christmas, the dog and I, between stone walls and up to the old well, turning home at the badge of blue lichen on a stone at the driveway's end. It was 50 years in the stitching, but nothing can wait like stone. These walls mark the old roads families would travel on Sundays to church, or to sell the wool sheared from the sheep herded into the stone corral behind the barn. Such stones, natural, squared, and brick-like, were so plentiful. The men who cleared these hills for farming stacked them higher than their horses' heads. Heaped in a stone yard's lowest corner lies the unusable, the too small, the oval, good for neither chimney nor wall, tossed over the shoulder as refuse. Stone potatoes were a cruel joke in the years when famine threatened even the steadiest. there were no crops but stone. On a hillside rests another yard of stone, hidden in a stand of slender beeches. Aaron and Elihu Bennett, twins dead in their teens. 8 Bennett infants, most gone before their naming. Abigail Bennett, who lived to 89 in a house built 24 years before revolutionary winds blew through the frame and lath. Cold spirits swirling around the granite spine of the house, a fire ever lit in its 3 hearths for cooking, washing, warmth. Hearthstones hewn from a massive gray tablet by a stonemason whose name has faded from the family ledger. He split stone with a star-tipped iron rod long as his forearm and a heavy mallet, playing a xylophone of feathers and wedges until the stone gave up its singing and fell open like a family Bible. What the mason left lives in the stone he worked, as the women of the house, tenders of the kettle and the spit, live in the chimney flue's thick creosote, as the builders of the walls live in the miles of stacked stones shouldering the roads, making peace through boundary, running unseen through the winter woods, dissolving by weather, by lichens, by degrees, as all things do. Thank you very much.